present to you the President of Georgia, H.E.Giorgi Margvelashvili. Mr. President, good morning. It's absolutely a pleasure to have you here. We're starting the second day of our debates, conferences. There's over 1,000 participants here over those 2 days. And I'm really honored to have not only you here with us, but also Georgia as a guest country of the Warsaw Security Forum. So thank you for the wonderful cooperation over the last few months.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to welcome the participants, and I believe that these kind of discussions, they really determine, foster, and influence not only the public opinion, but opinion of governments, opinion of political leaders, and I'm very happy to be here to participate together with you.
Thank you so much. We have about 30 minutes, as we discussed, for a conversation with our guest of honor, President of Georgia. I would like to ask him only a few, 1, 2, 3 questions straight away, but then we would really love to engage the audience. So please, the President has agreed to take questions from our audience, and we'll be also very happy to have these questions. So, President, today you have actually yesterday already concluded your official visit to Poland. Could you share with us any messages, key messages that you came here to Warsaw with, and also maybe some messages you're leaving Warsaw with?
Well, this is my 3rd meeting during this year with President Duda, and the return visit to Poland, to his visit to Georgia in May. And I believe that there is a reason for this kind of frequent and intensive communication with the Polish leadership. And there are several moments, and one of the main moments, I think, is that in working with Polish authorities, in working with Polish president, I think that among many friends that Georgia has, this is some of the most exceptional experiences, because here we get answers, here we get visions, here we get understanding of the challenges, but also the attempt to answer those challenges in some kind of creative manner, whereas very often we hear reasons why things have not been done or could not be done, or this is not the time to do something. So strategizing and thinking about future of Georgia, my country, and the region, and Eastern Europe, and Georgia as a country of Eastern Europe, in context of thinking about the future of the Central Europe, and how we have to jointly build more secure, more stable, and more prosperous future for our people and our societies, is something that we constantly do here, and we constantly do with our Polish friends. Let's look at the standing agenda. And let's look at the standing issues that are so important for us. NATO, expansion of NATO, Black Sea as a part of NATO context, cooperation of 3 seas that Poland is actively engaged in, the development and furthering of development of the north-south directions in Central and Eastern Europe, Georgia's more active integration and more active participation in the EU process, in the Union, which has its challenges, and Georgia as one of positive inputs into the EU process. Strengthening the stability of my country, and by strengthening stability and by serving the goal of Georgia's geopolitical goal of connection of the major Eastern and Western markets with each other, strengthening European security, be it in context of energy, be it in other aspects. All those issues, they are on the table, and all of those issues have challenges. But when we are talking here in Poland, when we are talking and strategizing about the future, we see that we are paying more attention to solutions rather than to finding the reasons why to stall one or another process. So I guess something that was described yesterday, that Europe definitely needs to embrace Eastern European countries like Georgia, who have committed themselves to the same family of nations and have paid a high price during these 25 years. This is a fact, that NATO has to embrace a country that has been standing arms in arms with the men and women of the North Atlantic community for the future and for more stability of the region. That the possibilities and options that are opened through a small strip, it's like 100-mile strip when you look at what Georgia is between, that goes between Caspian and Black Seas, and all the consequences that are given of economic choice and freedom to these partnerships, that those opportunities have to be addressed and not sort of forgotten for a while. I think that this emotion, this stimulus is something that we find in each other and try to put into more active European and Euro-Atlantic agenda.
You talk about common challenges, and I can imagine that Russia was on your mind yesterday also in the discussions with many Polish officials. What were your recommendations, not only for Poland, but generally for the West when dealing with a resurgent Russia?
I think that and I try to be very diplomatic, but I think...
Don't.
Well, they tell me I have to, you know. I think it's the fact that you have to open your eyes and acknowledge Russia and be sincere with Russia and be sincere with yourself. And we, unfortunately, have many cases that I can share when this understanding and acknowledgement of Russia has not happened, and that worked against the interests of the West and, in my very sincere belief, against the interests of Russia. But I will not be talking about the interests of Russia. 2014, right now, starting from 2014, hybrid war in Ukraine. Was it new? No, this was the case from beginning of 90s, where Russia's direct engagement was a factor to alienate and occupy two territories of Georgia. Very often I hear the comment that it was happening in 2008. No, the occupation of these two regions that are now currently occupied by Russia happened in the beginning of 90s. And the reason was clear. Georgia decided to be free and independent, to have its own choice, and it was punished through a hybrid war. Did we label it as a hybrid war at that time? No, we forgot it for the next 20 years, and then we got Ukraine. Once again, 2014, Ukraine and direct Russian military engagement in Crimea. Did it happen in 2014? No, it happened in 2008 in Georgia. And in 2008, there was a precedent of a neighboring nuclear superpower entering and changing the borders in a neighboring country. And this was a fact that I believe was underserved. No one applauded to this, but was there enough reaction? Was there enough condemnation of the fact that we would not get Ukraine and we would not get our consequences? 2010, Russia is talking very bluntly, clearly, and in good English about their interests in their nearest neighborhood. And still we don't get blunt responses to that, that this is a direct breach of international law. This is unacceptable, and if this continues, this is going to cause serious problems, not only for Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and other Russian neighbors, but this will never stop there. And the fact that it will not stop is very well visible today when they are talking about Russian interests in Europe and Russian engagement in other countries which believe that they are far away from Russia. Globalized world and hybrid, as well as cyber, as well as propaganda, work now without that border. So, I mean, I think that one of my very sincere sharings with our allies and friends is acknowledge Russia, understand Russia, and be sincere to Russia, and be faithful to your goals and principles which are declared. And when something is in a breach to these goals and principles, you have to stand up and be very clear about it, and not try to improvise and put this into some kind of different formats or understandings, which I have heard very often when they are telling me about how to explain what Russia is doing. So I believe this is a positive message, not only for Europe, not only for EU, not only for NATO, but this will be a positive, this will have positive consequences, including Russia. Because I think that when I'm looking at what happened in Georgia in 2008, it's a very strange war. You know, no one has really got it's a war that brought negative outcome for every party engaged. It's a tragedy for Georgia because its regions are occupied. It's tragedy for people who are living there because they don't have any perspective in living in this quasi semi-created states. It's an embarrassment for Russia because Russia has not gained anything from this because they don't need more land. There is no oil. There are no diamonds. I mean, there should be a reason to fight another country. So I think that bringing this rational response to violence and unacceptance of violence must be much more firmer, and it will be good for any party engaged.
I'll be very undiplomatic, sorry for that, but I think Russia has gained something significant with the frozen conflict in Georgia and the hot conflict in Ukraine, meaning it has effectively postponed any possibility of Georgia and Ukraine to join the North Atlantic Alliance. So the territorial sovereignty of countries such as Georgia and Ukraine has been breached, and until this is settled, it will be very difficult for Georgia to become a full member of NATO. What do you tell NATO members when they come back with South Ossetia, Abkhazia issues? Where do you see the way forward?
2 moments. First, I mentioned 90s and hybrid war because to identify that the year 2008, which is frequently considered as Russia's attempt to stop Georgia's integration to NATO, and sort of there is an attempt to legitimize this by, you know, there was this Bucharest commitment and Russia had to move. I mentioned 90s to just indicate that it didn't start in 2008. Russians were there from the beginning of 90s. No talk about NATO, no talk about EU, just Georgia, which has declared its independence, and the punishment is there. So this linkage between Bucharest and occupation in 2008, it's just not telling the previous series and the previous stories. Now about the benefit, okay, they have complicated future progress of Georgia and Ukraine. Tell me in what instance it is good for a citizen of Samara or Moscow or Petersburg. Does it bring anything, any solutions to people, any citizen of Russia? How do you measure success? Does it bring more prosperity? Did it bring more wealth? Did it further reforms? Did it further education? Is the demographic problem solved because of this? No benefits, tangible benefits, just an effective move to create problem to your neighbors. If we measure success in that dimensions, I don't think that this is a sustainable measurement system to create problems for Ukraine and Georgia or Moldova. But do we stop there? No, we didn't stop. Since 2008, the brakes that Russia has put in Georgia through occupying Tskhin Valley region and Abkhazia, our strategy was different. We understand this is a challenge, but could we say that Georgia's path to EU, to NATO has been stopped? Or we see the progress since 2008. Since 2008, we see more active Georgia in NATO, more NATO in Georgia. We see a substantive package of cooperation between Georgia and NATO. We see intensive drills and trainings of NATO forces in Georgia. We see active Georgia in Afghanistan, as we traditionally have been in other NATO missions. We see association agreement. We see DCFTA. We see visa liberalization. We see a progress, no matter that Russia has put the brakes.
Thank you. And my last question before I give the floor to our audience would be about a wider outlook. Here at the Warsaw Security Forum, we try not to only talk about the regular suspects from the regional perspective, but we try to have a more global outlook on what's going on in the world. And Georgia is in a very strategic position because it's located between the Black and the Caspian Seas. It's located in a way between Europe and Asia. Could you tell us more on how do you see the future of the development of the Eurasian continent, and with such important actors as China, for example, being more and more active and engaged, not only in Georgia, but in the entire Eurasian continent?
Well, China definitely is engaged, is active, and is, you see the Chinese vision in the region. Their project, One Belt, One Road, which is a new verification of the Silk. A global cooperation between Eastern and Western economies is something that's very important for my country, and my country is important in this context because the cooperation between East and West, they happen in, I would say, several dimensions. Basically, it's a Russian direction, and Russian direction is very politically loaded. Economic and regional cooperation has a big, huge political load. Normally, that's what happens in Russian case. There is this middle Georgia, Azerbaijan, Caspian Black Sea cooperation, which fits very well into the three C's that I've mentioned before, which is the Central European concept. But what is special in Georgian case? It's an alternative. This small strip that I mentioned, the width of 100 miles, that goes from Caspian to Black Sea, gives the coast to major developing landlocked economies of Asia. And the connections are now, and by the way, the concept was very properly developed and thought through by Georgia's previous leaderships, especially by President Shevardnadze, who had an active role in developing Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey cooperation on the energy sector. But it didn't stop there. We are furthering those projects. And more countries like Afghanistan through Turkmenistan, Iran is now getting more active in a southwest corridor. More countries of the Central Asia who have huge energy resources and supplies and are ready to cooperate in this direction, as well as the development of railways. We just finished the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway, which is directly linking the Asian railway system with the European one. So all those activities there, it is real economic freedom solution for countries that are east from Georgia. Because if you leave only the Russian route of this is major cooperation there, I believe that there is a big political component there. And Georgia is investing into this. And Georgia is always open, be it on the issue of tariffs, be it on the issue of cooperation, be it on the issue of engagement of other partners. Georgia is very much dedicated and clearly sees its vision and role in the region as the interconnector of this process. But of course, to keep this concept working, you have to keep Georgia independent from Russia, free, and European. In that case, this is an alternative path. If Georgia falls down under the influence of Moscow, then this is not an alternative. Then this is not an alternative path and solution for these major transcontinental projects. So our target and goal is to develop the country, to engage more partners. In 2019, the project which will be securing which will be a part of the energy solution for the southern European countries, for Italy, will be channeled through Georgia, and other solutions are going to come. So our target and goal is to keep this corridor, this model working, and I believe this is bringing solution not only to Georgia, but basically to all Caspian Sea countries, because then they see the opportunity to have economic freedom of choice in those projects.
Thank you very much, President. Well, the floor is yours. I see already first questions. The lady here and the lady here. Let's start, yes. We'll take two questions, or would you, yeah. We'll take two questions and then follow up. Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. President. Dovila Šukytė in Europe Studies Center, Lithuania. I very often joke that Georgia will be ready to join the EU when I'll be able to cross the street in Tbilisi or any other city in Georgia without stress. So if we would look like optimistically, when do you think Georgia will be ready to join the EU? When will you implement association agreement and DCFTA? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the lady on the left.
My name is Barçın İnanç. I'm a journalist from Turkey. On all the projects that you have mentioned that are linking Georgia to Europe, I have been hearing Turkey as well. Whereas it is also a country which is having very close relations with Russia, which creates alarm bells in Europe. I'm wondering whether Europe should be concerned about Turkey having close relations with Russia. Thank you.
Yeah, with the first question, I think that we are already implementing the association agreement and the DCFTA, and we are getting a lot of benefit from the visa liberalization. Visa waiver was an important component of the first two, because to implement and to activate and to engage Georgia more actively in European political, economic, educational, other kind people-to-people contacts, the visa issue has really accelerated all the options that we had that we have standing with Europe. But we are looking for more options and for more opportunities and for more, maybe at this time not that much political but technical opportunities of furthering Georgia's integration into the European process. So those tools are used, but for a country like Georgia, you always need a more active and aggressive momentum of moving towards Europe. Not only standing opportunities, but we have to be looking for every possibility to further the political integration. So in terms of timeline, it is difficult for me to tell you what is the timeline. It in many instances depends not on our willingness or readiness to move forward, but on on the overall EU condition, how active, how decisive EU could be. The same goes with NATO. How ready you will be to tackle the challenges and to be more proactive in overcoming some of the geopolitical issues that the Union has, but how you will overcome the fatigue. And in this respect, I just mentioned Poland as a country that has much more solutions than reasons why things should not be moving much more faster. On the Turkish issue, I think that Turkey is a strategic partner for Georgia, and as you noted, I mentioned basically Turkey in every regional strategic cooperation that we are having, TANAP, the TAP project I mentioned in context of Italy. I believe that Russian-Turkish relationships are good in context of economic cooperation. I don't think there is more room for further development of these relationships. Cooperation between Turkey and Russia is beneficiary for both economies. And me personally, I see no problem in cooperation in context of Russia and Turkey. I prefer that they cooperate than there is a tension, historic tension, and this historic tension always is dangerous for the region. Russian-Turkish cooperation, I don't think it will go beyond that, but I prefer these two major powers to cooperate rather than to be in the historic status when there was always a possibility for a more violent development of the situation.
Thank you, and we'll take two last questions. The gentleman here, and I thought I saw, then I guess one last question.
Thank you, Giray Sadık, Associate Professor. Well, you touched upon earlier to the lessons not learned by Euro-Atlantic community when it comes to hybrid warfare and tactics from Georgia than having grave consequences in Ukraine. Now, today, there is burgeoning cooperation at regional level, as you mentioned, between Turkey and Georgia, and at the same time, Turkey and Russia. But what could be the lessons to be learned for wider Black Sea, including Georgia and Ukraine, but on the wider level for transatlantic community from this burgeoning cooperation? Thank you.
Well, Black Sea has some very interesting developments in recent years. First, it is the fact that Georgia and Ukraine have signed the association agreement, have free trade. Black Sea is basically sea of countries, majority of whom have free trade with Europe. Through the projects that I have just mentioned and more active East-West cooperation through this Caspian Black Sea corridor, Black Sea has become a coast to major landlocked economies of Asia. So the function of Black Sea as a sea of European trade and Euro-Asian trade and cooperation is increasing even more. That's why we have much more accent for a Black Sea, not only as a transit sea, but also as a sea that should be standing as a fact of trade and cooperation between East and West. That's why it's very important that NATO started to engage more actively in Black Sea, trying to develop stability and secure stability for this sea, not only as a line of division between NATO and Russia, but also very much as a securement for more stability and cooperation between Eastern and Western markets. So in this respect, I think that Black Sea has got even more significance and even more opportunities are open, and that those projects are really determining and opening opportunities for a very interesting Caspian Sea potential, where there is energy, where there are resources, where there are new projects developing, and through which there's new projects of Central Asian economies is developing. So I think that the Black Sea is, I wouldn't say regaining, it's gaining its very important significance as a sea of cooperation and Eastern-Western economy coexistence or trade.
Mr. President, our time is up, unfortunately, but it has been an immense pleasure for us to host you here. Is there any last message you would like to leave with our participants are here in Poland?
Well, no, I just want to thank you for an interesting discussion, and as always, it's a pleasure to be here, to be in Warsaw, to be together with so much dedicated and visionary people who have their vision of the future of their country, but not only their country and beyond, because in this globalized world, I don't think that you can develop vision only for your own country if you don't see the context of others and how they are engaged in your well-being and prosperity. Just thank you for this experience that I'm getting in Warsaw.
Thank you so much, President. Thank you for being with us.